She stole my sister's engagement ring and said she didn't deserve it. I called off the wedding, then my life unraveled. What started as a breakup became a war I never saw coming. My fiancé stole my sister's engagement ring and said that my sister doesn't deserve it. So I stopped our wedding and told her we're over. I have been engaged to Sophie for a little over a year. When we first started dating, she seemed perfect, kind, thoughtful, and always eager to help. She had a bubbly personality that drew everyone in, including my family. I felt lucky to have found someone so warm and supportive. But after we got engaged and moved in together, I started noticing small things that didn't sit right with me. It began with food. I'd buy snacks for work, and they'd disappear overnight. Sophie would laugh it off, saying, "Oops, sorry." I couldn't resist. It didn't bother me at first. Everyone eats their partner's snacks sometimes, but it kept happening. Leftovers I specifically saved for lunch would vanish, and she'd shrug it off with, "What's yours is mine now, right?" Then she started borrowing my belongings without asking. My favorite hoodie ended up in her car for weeks. My headphones went missing, and she admitted she'd taken them to work because hers weren't as good. She even used my work tablet for online shopping while I was away. Whenever I brought it up, she'd dismiss it, saying, "Relax, we're getting married. We'll be sharing everything soon anyway." I brushed it off because none of it seemed worth a huge fight. A few months later, my best friend came over for a barbecue. He left his expensive sunglasses on our counter. A week later, I saw Sophie wearing the exact same pair. When I asked where she got them, she claimed, "Oh, I found them in my car." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist, but I didn't want to accuse her without proof. Then came the incident that ruined everything. 2 months ago, we had a family dinner at our place. My sister, Emily, had recently gotten engaged. Her fiancé proposed with a stunning oval diamond ring set in a gold band, an heirloom our late grandmother left her. It was the most meaningful piece of jewelry she owned. While helping clean up after dinner, Emily took off her ring to do dishes. At the end of the night, she forgot to put it back on. The next morning, Emily called me crying. She couldn't find her ring anywhere. We searched the kitchen, the garbage, the drains, every possible spot. Nothing. She was devastated. That ring wasn't just valuable. It was a piece of our grandmother that could never be replaced. I tried to believe Sophie wouldn't take it. I really wanted to trust her. But a week later, while looking for my passport in Sophie's dresser, I found a ring box. Inside was Emily's engagement ring. My hands were shaking. I knew it was Emily's, there was no doubt. When I confronted Sophie, she didn't even look guilty. She calmly said, "Oh, that's not your sister's. I bought it online. It just looks similar." I asked for proof of purchase. She got defensive, saying, "Why are you going through my things? Don't you trust me?" I told her I wasn't stupid. I knew it was Emily's ring. She finally admitted she took it but tried to justify it. "She left it sitting there for hours," Sophie said. "She's careless." I just thought, why should someone like her have something so beautiful when she doesn't even take care of it? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I immediately called Emily and told her the truth. When I returned the ring, Emily cried and hugged me, saying she was relieved but also heartbroken that Sophie had done this. My parents were furious and said Sophie wasn't welcome in the family anymore. That night, I told Sophie our engagement was over. I said stealing from my family wasn't a mistake I could forgive, and that lying about it for days made it so much worse. She exploded, calling me a monster for throwing away our relationship over a stupid ring. She packed a bag and stormed out. Since then, Sophie has been blowing up my phone with messages saying I ruined her life and that a ring isn't worth ending an engagement. Some mutual friends think I overreacted, saying it was one bad choice and that I should have tried to work it out instead of throwing everything away. But Emily's tears and Sophie's unapologetic attitude are burned into my mind. She didn't seem sorry she stole the ring. She seemed sorry she got caught. Then this morning, I got a call from my bank. Someone had emptied my entire savings account. Full story on channel. Link below. I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. Zero balance. Every penny I'd saved for our wedding, for our future home, completely gone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transaction history. Multiple transfers, all made yesterday while I was at work. The receiving account wasn't one I recognized. I immediately drove to the bank. The teller pulled up my account and confirmed what I already knew. Someone had accessed my online banking and systematically drained everything. They showed me the login times and IP addresses. The transfers happened from a device I didn't recognize, but the location data made my blood run cold. They originated from Sophie's parents' neighborhood. The bank manager took me to a private office. She explained that since the transfers used my legitimate login credentials, recovering the money would be complicated. I filled out fraud reports and disputed transaction forms, my hand cramping from writing the same information over and over. The manager suggested I file a police report, but something held me back. Part of me still couldn't believe Sophie would go this far. I left the bank feeling hollow. $23,000, years of overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and careful budgeting all vanished. I sat in my car for a long time, just processing what had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a screenshot of my social media profile with the words cheater and liar edited across my face. More messages flooded in from mutual friends. Sophie had posted on every platform, claiming I'd been unfaithful throughout our relationship. She wrote elaborate stories about finding evidence of affairs, complete with dates and supposed details. Friends who'd known me for years suddenly questioned my character. My college roommate asked if the allegations were true. My coworker mentioned seeing the posts and wanted to know my side. I spent the rest of the day doing damage control. I called friends individually, explaining what really happened with Emily's ring and why I'd ended things with Sophie. Some believed me immediately, others seemed skeptical, especially when I couldn't provide proof of Sophie's theft beyond my word against hers. The friend whose sunglasses had gone missing months ago suddenly remembered the incident and backed up my story, but Sophie had already convinced half our social circle that I was the villain. Emily came over that evening. She found me hunched over my laptop, trying to report Sophie's defamatory posts to various platforms. My sister took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. She'd seen some of the posts herself and had already started defending me online. She helped me document everything, taking screenshots before Sophie could delete evidence. My parents arrived an hour later with dinner. Mom's face was tight with anger, while Dad paced the living room, muttering about installing security cameras. They'd received their own share of Sophie's wrath. She'd sent them long emails detailing how they'd raised a manipulative son and how they'd never welcomed her into the family properly. Mom showed me the messages, each one more unhinged than the last. Over Chinese takeout, we strategized. Dad suggested changing all my passwords immediately. Emily helped me set up two-factor authentication on everything. Mom made a list of all the items that had gone missing during my relationship with Sophie. The total value was staggering, thousands of dollars in electronics, jewelry, and cash that had mysteriously disappeared over the months. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, watching as more people reacted to Sophie's posts. Some mutual friends had already unfriended me. Others sent supportive messages, saying they knew something was off about her story. I noticed Sophie had blocked me on everything, but Emily showed me that the posts kept coming. Each one painted me in a worse light than the last. The next morning brought fresh chaos. My landlord called, saying someone had reported noise complaints and property damage at my apartment. I hadn't even been home most of the previous day. When I explained the situation, he sounded sympathetic, but warned me that any more complaints could jeopardize my lease. I realized Sophie knew exactly where to apply pressure. I decided to work from home, unable to face potential confrontations at the office. Around lunch, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw two of Sophie's friends standing outside. I didn't answer, but they slipped a note under the door. It was a handwritten letter from Sophie, demanding I return her belongings, including items I knew were mine. She threatened to involve lawyers if I didn't comply within 48 hours. Emily stopped by after work with a box of my things from Sophie's place. A mutual friend who still had access had grabbed what they could. Most of my belongings were missing or damaged. My favorite watch was gone. The expensive headphones I'd bought myself for Christmas were nowhere to be found. Even small sentimental items, like photos from our trips, had vanished. That evening, I discovered Sophie had been busier than I thought. She'd contacted my employer through LinkedIn, sending messages to my boss and HR department about my unstable behavior and anger issues. Thankfully, my boss called me directly, having worked with me for 5 years and knowing my character. Still, the fact that Sophie was trying to sabotage my career made me realize how far she was willing to go. My friend Jake came over with his girlfriend. They'd been at the dinner party when Emily's ring went missing, and remembered Sophie acting strangely that night. Jake mentioned seeing Sophie near Emily's purse multiple times. His girlfriend recalled Sophie making comments about the ring, saying it was wasted on someone who'd probably get divorced anyway. They offered to write statements about what they'd witnessed. The situation escalated when I received an email from a credit monitoring service. Someone had applied for 3 credit cards in my name. The applications included my social security number and other personal information only Sophie would know. I spent hours on the phone with credit agencies, placing fraud alerts and freezing my credit. Each representative I spoke with sounded sympathetic, but explained the long process ahead to clear my name. Mom insisted I stay with them for a few nights. As I packed a bag, I found more evidence of Sophie's theft. My emergency cash stash was empty. The spare key to my car was missing. Even my passport wasn't where I'd left it. I turned my apartment upside down, creating an inventory of everything missing. The list grew longer with each room I searched. At my parents' house, we sat around the kitchen table like a war council. Dad had researched identity theft protection services. Emily had compiled a timeline of Sophie's escalating behavior. Mom had reached out to her network, warning them about Sophie's lies. We weren't going to let her destroy my life without a fight. The next few days blurred together. I contested fraudulent charges, disputed false claims, and rebuilt my digital security from scratch. Friends who'd initially doubted me started reaching out, saying Sophie's stories weren't adding up. Her accusations became increasingly wild and contradictory. She claimed I'd been cheating with multiple people, including some I'd never even met. My bank finally had some good news. They'd traced the fraudulent transfers and found evidence of unauthorized access. While they couldn't guarantee full recovery, they'd started the investigation process. The bad news was, it could take months to resolve. In the meantime, I was living off my checking account and credit cards, watching every penny. Sophie's campaign continued relentlessly. She created fake social media profiles to harass me and my family. She left reviews on my company's website mentioning me by name. She even contacted my ex-girlfriend from college, trying to dig up dirt from years ago. Each attack felt like another violation of my privacy and peace. I discovered Sophie had accessed my email account when rejection letters started arriving for job applications I never submitted. She'd been sending poorly written resumes with offensive cover letters to companies in my field, systematically trying to destroy my professional reputation. The applications included inappropriate photos and inflammatory political statements that would make any employer immediately blacklist me. Emily helped me secure all my accounts, while I dealt with the fallout. We spent an entire afternoon calling companies, explaining the situation, and asking them to disregard the fraudulent applications. Most HR departments were understanding once I explained, but the damage to my reputation lingered. Word travels fast in my industry, and I worried about the long-term impact. The harassment intensified when Sophie started targeting Emily directly. My sister received anonymous packages at work containing intimate photos Sophie had apparently taken of me without my knowledge during our relationship. The packages included threatening notes suggesting Emily would pay for turning me against her. Emily's hands shook as she showed me the contents, and we immediately documented everything. Dad installed security cameras around their house after Sophie was spotted driving slowly past their property multiple times. The footage showed her car circling the block at odd hours, sometimes parking across the street for extended periods. We couldn't prove she was planning anything, but the surveillance made everyone nervous. Mom started checking locks obsessively and jumped at every unexpected sound. Sophie's next move caught us off guard. She contacted my elderly aunt, spinning elaborate tales about how I'd stolen money from her and abandoned her when she was sick. My aunt, who'd always been fond of Sophie, initially believed the stories. She called my mother in tears, devastated that her nephew could be so cruel. It took hours of explanation and showing her evidence of Sophie's lies before she understood the truth. The situation with mutual friends grew more complex. Sophie had created a detailed timeline of our relationship with fabricated evidence of my supposed infidelities. She'd edited text messages, created fake dating profiles with my photos, and even produced receipts from hotels I'd never visited. Her presentation was so thorough that even friends who initially supported me began to waver. I discovered Sophie had been visiting my regular coffee shop, telling the staff elaborate stories about our reconciliation. The barista mentioned she'd been asking about my schedule, pretending we were planning a surprise reunion. She'd even prepaid for my usual order several times, leaving notes that suggested we were still together. The staff found it romantic until I explained the reality. Emily noticed someone had been going through her trash when she found bags torn open and contents scattered. We suspected Sophie was looking for personal information to use against us. Dad started shredding everything before disposal, and we became hyper-vigilant about protecting any documents that could be weaponized. The constant state of alertness was exhausting. Sophie escalated by contacting my neighbors with false noise complaints and claims that I was dealing substances from my apartment. She'd call at different times using various phone numbers, making it difficult to trace. My landlord received so many complaints that he scheduled a meeting to discuss my lease. I had to provide evidence of Sophie's harassment to avoid eviction. The psychological warfare expanded when I started receiving magazine subscriptions I never ordered. Adult magazines, radical political publications, and other inappropriate materials arrived at my workplace. My mailroom staff began giving me strange looks, and I had to explain the situation to HR. Sophie had used my company credit card information she'd stolen to pay for the subscriptions. Mom discovered Sophie had created social media profiles impersonating her, sending friend requests to distant relatives and family friends. The fake profiles shared embarrassing family stories and made inappropriate comments on people's posts. We spent days contacting relatives, explaining the impersonation, and helping them report the fake accounts. The damage to family relationships was significant. Sophie's attempts to access my finances continued despite the security measures. She tried to social engineer her way into my accounts by calling customer service representatives and pretending to be me. She had enough personal information to answer many security questions, but the additional protections we'd implemented prevented access. Each attempt was documented and added to our growing file of evidence. The stress began affecting my work performance. I made mistakes I never would have made before, missed deadlines while dealing with Sophie's latest attack, and struggled to concentrate during meetings. My boss remained supportive, but expressed concern about my productivity. I couldn't blame him. Sophie's campaign was succeeding in destabilizing every aspect of my life. Emily discovered Sophie had been contacting her fiancé's family, spreading lies about our family's stability, and suggesting Emily was just like me, a cheater and manipulator. She'd found their information through social media and began her poison campaign. Emily's future in-laws were confused and concerned until Emily and her fiancé explained the situation. The incident nearly derailed their wedding planning. Sophie targeted Dad's small business next. She left fake negative reviews on multiple platforms, claiming poor service and dishonest practices. She created multiple accounts to make it appear like numerous customers were complaining. Dad spent hours responding to each review, explaining the situation to platform moderators and trying to protect his reputation built over 30 years. I received a call from my gym saying my membership had been canceled and I was banned from the premises. Sophie had gone there claiming to be my wife, saying I'd been stalking female members and making them uncomfortable. She'd cried convincingly enough that management took immediate action. It took character references from longtime gym members who knew me to reverse the ban. The credit card fraud escalated when Sophie used my information to rent expensive equipment in my name. Photography gear, power tools, and electronics were rented and never returned. The rental companies came after me for thousands in lost equipment. Each case required hours of phone calls, police reports, and documentation to resolve. My credit score plummeted despite my efforts to dispute everything. Emily's workplace became a target when Sophie started calling her office, pretending to be various people with emergencies that required Emily to leave immediately. She claimed to be hospital staff, saying I'd been in an accident, police officers needing Emily's immediate presence, and even Child Protective Services with urgent matters. Emily's supervisor grew frustrated with the constant disruptions. Sophie discovered where Mom volunteered and began spreading rumors in that community. She attended a few volunteer sessions, presenting herself as a concerned ex-fiancé worried about my family's dangerous tendencies. She suggested Mom was enabling my behavior and couldn't be trusted around vulnerable populations. Mom had to provide character references from people she'd worked with for years. The impersonation tactics evolved when Sophie created a dating profile using my photos and information. She matched with women and sent inappropriate messages, then gave them my real phone number and workplace information. I started receiving angry calls and visits from women I'd never contacted. Some threatened to report me for harassment, requiring careful explanation of the identity theft. Dad noticed someone had been tampering with their mail. Important bills went missing, packages were opened and resealed, and magazines arrived with pages torn out. We installed a locking mailbox, but the sense of violation lingered. Every piece of mail became suspect, every package a potential trap. The post office confirmed someone had attempted to file a change of address form for my parents. Sophie's financial attacks grew more sophisticated. She'd memorized my spending patterns and used stolen card information for small purchases that might go unnoticed. Coffee shops in different cities, online subscriptions, and digital goods were charged in amounts small enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. I had to scrutinize every statement, questioning every transaction. The workplace harassment intensified when Sophie began contacting my clients directly. She'd research my projects and reach out to clients with claims that I was unreliable and had been fired. She provided enough accurate project details to seem credible. My boss had to personally call several clients to reassure them and explain the situation. My professional reputation took hits that would take years to fully repair. Emily faced her own professional challenges when Sophie created a website using Emily's name and photo, advertising escort services. The site included Emily's real workplace and city, making it appear legitimate to anyone searching her name. Emily discovered it when a coworker awkwardly mentioned finding something strange online. We worked frantically to get the site removed and clean up search results. Sophie attempted to infiltrate our family gatherings by befriending distant relatives who didn't know about our situation. She appeared at my cousin's birthday party as someone's +1, acting surprised to see us there. The confrontation was avoided only because Dad quietly explained the situation to the host, who discreetly asked Sophie to leave. Family events became tense, always watching for her next appearance. The paranoia affected our daily routines. Simple tasks like grocery shopping became strategic operations. We varied our routes, changed our schedules, and remained constantly vigilant. Sophie had demonstrated she was watching our patterns, and we couldn't afford to be predictable. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but necessary for our safety and sanity. I discovered Sophie had been recording our phone conversations during our relationship and was now editing them to create false narratives. She'd spliced together words and phrases to make it sound like I was admitting to crimes or making threats. She shared these edited recordings with mutual friends as proof of my dangerous behavior. The technical sophistication of her attacks kept escalating. Mom's book club became an unexpected battlefield when Sophie joined under a fake name. She spent weeks building relationships with the members before revealing her tragic story about our failed engagement. The group was divided, some supporting Sophie's version of events, while others sensed something was off. Mom had to leave the club she'd enjoyed for over a decade. Sophie's attempts to access my apartment continued, despite changed locks. The building's security footage showed her trying different keys and attempting to convince maintenance staff she was still my fiancé, who'd been accidentally locked out. She'd dressed professionally and carried fake documentation to appear credible. Building management increased security measures and distributed her photo to all staff. The financial investigation revealed Sophie had been planning her theft for months. She'd gradually gathered information, tested access methods, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Bank investigators found evidence of practice runs where she'd accessed accounts but not taken money, learning the system's weaknesses. The premeditation made recovery more likely, but also more chilling. Emily's wedding planning suffered as venues and vendors received calls from someone claiming to be Emily, canceling reservations and appointments. Sophie had gathered enough information from social media to sound convincing. Each cancellation required hours of phone calls to reverse, and some vendors refused to work with Emily, fearing drama. The stress nearly broke Emily's normally cheerful demeanor. I learned Sophie had applied for jobs at my company under fake names. HR flagged the applications due to inconsistencies, but she'd gotten far enough in the process to learn about internal procedures and employee information. The security breach prompted a company-wide review of hiring practices. My colleagues began viewing me with suspicion, wondering what other problems I might bring. Dad's business faced another attack when Sophie filed false complaints with regulatory agencies. She claimed health code violations, tax evasion, and unsafe practices. Each complaint triggered investigations that required time, money, and documentation to resolve. Dad's stress levels soared as he dealt with inspectors while trying to maintain normal operations. Customers noticed the disruption, and some took their business elsewhere. The cyberstalking evolved when Sophie began using sophisticated spoofing techniques to make calls appear to come from our numbers. Friends received middle-of-the-night calls, seemingly from me, filled with breathing and hang-ups. Family members got texts from Emily's number with disturbing messages. We had to constantly explain and apologize for communications we didn't send, further straining relationships. Sophie infiltrated online support groups I'd joined for identity theft victims. She posed as a fellow victim while gathering information about my recovery efforts and emotional state. When she revealed herself, she twisted my words to make me seem paranoid and unstable. The one safe space I'd found to process the trauma became another battlefield. Mom discovered Sophie had been photographing their house from various angles, documenting their routines and visitors. We found the photos posted on a real estate website with a fake listing, suggesting the house was for sale due to family legal troubles. Potential buyers had already contacted Mom about viewing the property. The listing was removed, but the invasion of privacy left lasting anxiety. The pattern of Sophie's attacks revealed a disturbing level of obsession. She maintained detailed spreadsheets of our schedules, social connections, and vulnerabilities. When police finally took our complaints seriously enough to investigate, they found evidence of extensive surveillance and planning. The officer admitted he'd rarely seen such organized harassment from someone without a criminal background. Emily's fiancé became a target when Sophie created dating profiles for him on hookup apps. She used photos from his social media and listed his real workplace. His colleagues started receiving matches and messages, creating an embarrassing situation at his office. The incident tested Emily's relationship, though they worked through it together. Sophie had found another pressure point to exploit. I discovered Sophie had been intercepting my mail by bribing a postal worker. Important documents, including bank statements and legal correspondence, had been diverted to her. The investigation that followed revealed she'd been building a comprehensive picture of my finances and legal strategy. The postal worker faced charges, but the damage to my privacy was irreversible. Sophie's campaign reached a new low when she contacted my deceased grandmother's friends, claiming I'd stolen inheritance money meant for charity. These elderly women, who'd known me since childhood, were heartbroken by the accusations. Mom spent days visiting each one, explaining the situation and comforting them. The cruelty of targeting grieving elderly people revealed Sophie's complete lack of conscience. The workplace situation deteriorated when Sophie convinced a former colleague to file a false harassment complaint against me. The investigation required me to provide extensive documentation of our past professional relationship and Sophie's current harassment campaign. Though ultimately cleared, the investigation created a cloud of suspicion that affected my relationships with other colleagues. Emily noticed someone had been following her home from work. The car would maintain distance but take every turn she did. When she varied her route, the car adapted. We documented license plates and times, building evidence of stalking. Emily started carrying pepper spray and taking self-defense classes. The fear transformed my confident sister into someone who constantly looked over her shoulder. Sophie's financial warfare continued with her opening utility accounts in my name at addresses across the state. I started receiving shut-off notices for services I'd never requested at places I'd never lived. Each account required hours to dispute and close. The utility company's fraud departments knew my voice by now, but the process remained tedious and stressful. The family's response evolved from reactive to proactive. We held strategy meetings, shared information immediately, and developed protocols for various scenarios. Dad created a secure communication system for sharing updates. Mom maintained a master file of all incidents. Emily became our social media monitor. We'd become a coordinated unit fighting against Sophie's chaos. I realized Sophie had been using her knowledge of my habits against me in subtle ways. She'd order my favorite coffee to be delivered during important meetings, send flowers with cryptic messages to my office, and time her attacks for maximum disruption. The psychological precision of her campaign showed she'd studied me carefully during our relationship, cataloging weaknesses for future use. The turning point approached as Sophie's attacks became increasingly desperate and sloppy. Her lies grew more outlandish, her schemes more transparent. Friends who'd initially believed her started questioning the inconsistencies. Her fake accounts were easier to spot. The mask of the perfect victim was slipping, revealing the calculating manipulator beneath. We sensed an opportunity to finally end her reign of terror. I noticed Sophie's desperation reaching new heights when she showed up at my parents' house at 3 a.m., pounding on the door and screaming accusations. Dad grabbed his phone to record while Mom called the police. Sophie threw rocks at their windows, shattering one before speeding away. The officers took statements and added this incident to our growing file, though they explained prosecution would require more evidence. The next morning revealed Sophie had spray-painted obscenities across Dad's business storefront. Security footage captured her clearly, but she'd worn a disguise. Dad spent hours scrubbing the walls while customers walked by, shaking their heads. Several regular clients mentioned receiving strange emails about Dad's supposed criminal activities. We traced the emails to newly created accounts using variations of Sophie's name. Emily discovered Sophie had been impersonating her at local wedding venues, attempting to cancel bookings and demand refunds. One venue manager called Emily directly, suspicious of the aggressive demands. We compiled a list of every vendor and personally visited each one, providing Sophie's photo and explaining the situation. Most were understanding, though some remained wary of potential drama. Sophie's financial attacks evolved when she started filing false insurance claims using my information. I received notices about car accidents I'd never been in, medical procedures I'd never had, and property damage that never occurred. Each claim required extensive documentation to dispute. The insurance companies flagged my accounts for potential fraud, making legitimate claims nearly impossible. Mom found Sophie lurking outside her volunteer center, taking photos of children entering the building. The center's director immediately banned Sophie from the premises and alerted other parents. Mom had to explain the situation to concerned families, assuring them their children were safe. The incident damaged Mom's reputation despite her years of dedicated service. I discovered Sophie had been systematically contacting every company I'd ever interviewed with, claiming to be checking references and spreading lies about my work history. She'd memorized my resume and used insider knowledge to sound credible. Several potential employers quietly removed me from consideration. My job search stalled completely as word spread through professional networks. Sophie targeted Emily's wedding dress appointment by calling the boutique and claiming Emily had stolen her own dress design. The shop owner nearly canceled Emily's order before Emily provided proof of her original sketches and inspiration photos dating back months. The stress of defending every wedding detail exhausted Emily, stealing joy from what should have been happy planning. Dad's business suffered when Sophie convinced a disgruntled former employee to file false workplace injury claims. The investigation disrupted operations for weeks. Dad had to provide years of safety records and employee testimonials. Though ultimately cleared, the investigation costs and lost productivity strained the business finances. Several employees started looking for other jobs, fearing instability. Sophie infiltrated my apartment building's social media group, posting photos suggesting substance deals and suspicious activities in my unit. Neighbors began avoiding me in hallways. Some parents prevented their children from playing near my door. The building's management received multiple complaints demanding my eviction. I had to attend a tenant meeting to defend myself against Sophie's fabrications. Emily's fiancé discovered Sophie had been calling his workplace, pretending to be a debt collector seeking payment for loans he'd never taken. His employer questioned his financial responsibility. He spent days providing bank statements and credit reports to prove his financial stability. The stress tested their relationship as wedding preparations became a constant battle against Sophie's interference. Sophie's attacks on Mom intensified when she created a blog detailing Mom's supposed neglectful parenting and family secrets. She mixed real family photos with fabricated stories of abuse and dysfunction. Mom's friends started asking uncomfortable questions. We worked frantically to get the blog removed, but cached versions persisted online. Mom cried seeing her reputation destroyed by someone she'd once welcomed as family. I caught Sophie following me to job interviews, waiting outside buildings to approach potential employers after I left. One hiring manager mentioned a woman claiming to be my wife had warned them about my violent temper. Another said someone called during my interview, claiming I was wanted for embezzlement. Each opportunity evaporated as Sophie poisoned wells before I could even drink from them. Sophie discovered Emily's wedding registry and systematically purchased items only to return them damaged. Stores flagged the registry for suspicious activity. Emily received notices about returns she hadn't made and complaints about damaged goods. We spent entire weekends visiting stores, explaining the situation, and trying to salvage what remained of Emily's carefully chosen items. Dad noticed Sophie had been photographing his employees and customers, creating fake social media profiles using their images. She posted inflammatory content that appeared to come from his business associates. Several customers severed relationships, not understanding they'd been impersonated. Dad spent countless hours contacting each affected person, explaining the identity theft, and rebuilding damaged relationships. Sophie's campaign reached new lows when she started leaving dead flowers on our doorsteps with cryptic notes. The messages referenced private conversations from our relationship, twisted to sound threatening. We documented each delivery, building evidence of escalating harassment. The psychological impact of finding these gifts wore on everyone's nerves. I discovered Sophie had enrolled in online courses using my credit card information, then submitted assignments filled with plagiarized content and offensive material under my name. Academic institutions began blacklisting me from their programs. My plans for professional development crumbled as Sophie systematically destroyed my educational opportunities. Emily faced crisis when Sophie contacted her wedding photographer, claiming Emily had assaulted her and threatening legal action if the photographer worked the wedding. The photographer, fearing involvement in legal drama, canceled the contract. Emily scrambled to find replacement vendors while Sophie continued poisoning relationships with every professional connected to the wedding. Sophie attempted to access Dad's business bank accounts by impersonating his bookkeeper over the phone. Though unsuccessful, the attempts triggered security protocols that froze the accounts temporarily. Dad couldn't pay employees or vendors on time. The disruption damaged relationships with suppliers who'd worked with him for decades. Mom discovered Sophie had joined online grief support groups, claiming I'd caused the death of fictional family members through negligence. She spread stories about my supposed substance abuse and violent behavior. Group members who'd Googled my name found these posts and began questioning every interaction. Mom had to leave groups that had provided genuine support during real family losses. Sophie's desperation became evident when she started making mistakes. She accidentally sent threatening messages from her real phone number instead of spoofed ones. Her fake social media profiles contained inconsistencies that friends began noticing. The elaborate lies became harder to maintain as she juggled multiple false narratives. I realized Sophie had been gradually losing allies. Her friends started reaching out to me, apologizing for believing her stories. They'd noticed inconsistencies in her tales and witnessed her obsessive behavior firsthand. One mentioned Sophie spent entire days crafting fake evidence and planning new attacks. Another revealed Sophie had been stealing from them too. Emily's breaking point came when Sophie attempted to impersonate her at the wedding venue, trying to change the ceremony to a different date when Emily would be out of town. The venue manager recognized the deception and called Emily immediately. Emily collapsed in tears, exhausted from defending every aspect of her life against Sophie's relentless attacks. Dad discovered Sophie had been filing false tax documents in his business's name, attempting to trigger audits and investigations. Though the filings were obviously fraudulent, they required immediate attention from accountants and lawyers. The professional fees mounted as Dad fought to protect his business from Sophie's bureaucratic warfare. Sophie made a critical error when she attempted to access my apartment using a fake key while I was home. I heard the door handle rattling and looked through the peephole to see her trying different keys. I recorded everything on my phone while calling building security. She fled when security arrived, but the footage clearly showed her attempted break-in. The tide turned when Sophie targeted the wrong person. She attempted to spread lies about Mom to a family friend who happened to be a retired detective. He immediately recognized the harassment patterns and offered to help document Sophie's activities. His professional expertise helped us organize evidence in ways that would be useful for potential legal action. Emily's wedding day approached with everyone on edge. We hired security guards to check invitations and watch for Sophie. The venue staff had her photo and strict instructions. Despite precautions, Sophie attempted to enter dressed as catering staff. Security intercepted her at the service entrance. She screamed accusations while being escorted away, but the wedding proceeded without further disruption. After the wedding, Sophie's attacks became increasingly erratic. She seemed to realize her tactics were failing. Friends who'd supported her began distancing themselves. Her social media posts grew more unhinged, contradicting previous lies. The careful persona she'd crafted crumbled as desperation drove her to sloppier schemes. I finally recovered most of my stolen funds when the bank's investigation concluded. They'd traced the transfers through multiple accounts, all linked to Sophie. The evidence was overwhelming. Though criminal prosecution remained uncertain, the financial recovery provided relief. I could finally move forward with rebuilding my life. Sophie's final undoing came when she targeted someone else entirely. A woman from her gym contacted me through social media, sharing an eerily familiar story. Sophie had befriended her, gradually stolen items, then launched a harassment campaign when confronted. Together, we discovered 3 other victims with similar experiences. Sophie's pattern of behavior stretched back years. The other victims and I coordinated our evidence, creating a comprehensive timeline of Sophie's crimes. With multiple victims and extensive documentation, authorities finally took action. Sophie faced numerous charges including identity theft, fraud, and stalking. Her arrest made local news, warning others about her schemes. During the investigation, police discovered Sophie's apartment filled with evidence of her obsession. Walls covered in photos of our family, detailed schedules of our routines, and notebooks planning future attacks. The scope of her surveillance shocked even experienced officers. They found stolen items from multiple victims, including things I hadn't realized were missing. Sophie's family finally reached out, apologizing for their daughter's behavior. They revealed she'd been struggling with mental health issues for years, but had refused treatment. They'd enabled her behavior by believing her victim narratives. Seeing the evidence against her forced them to confront the reality they'd been avoiding. As Sophie awaited trial, her remaining supporters abandoned her. The friends who'd believed her lies felt betrayed learning the truth. Her social media accounts went silent. The woman who'd terrorized my family for months suddenly had no platform and no audience. Her power evaporated once people saw through her manipulations. My family slowly recovered from the ordeal. Dad's business rebounded as customers learned the truth. Mom returned to volunteering with renewed appreciation from her community. Emily enjoyed married life, free from Sophie's interference. We remained vigilant, but no longer lived in constant fear. Sophie had lost her ability to hurt us. I returned to my apartment and career, rebuilding what Sophie had tried to destroy. Job opportunities reopened as employers learned about the harassment campaign. Friends who distanced themselves apologized and reconnected. The experience had cost me financially and emotionally, but I'd survived with my family's support intact. Sophie ultimately pled guilty to multiple charges, receiving probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. The court ordered no contact with any victims. She lost her job, her apartment, and every relationship built on lies. The woman who'd tried to destroy others had only succeeded in destroying herself. Our family grew stronger through the ordeal. We'd learned to protect each other and recognize manipulation tactics. Emily's wedding photos showed genuine joy despite the stress leading up to it. Dad's business thrived with renewed community support. Mom's volunteer work continued with deeper appreciation from those who knew our story. We'd survived Sophie's campaign of terror and emerged more united than ever.